Beijing is bracing for a potential second wave of virus outbreaks, and the new cluster of cases at a wholesale market has spread to 3 other provinces. Top officials warn that the outbreak will widen. TikTok permanently shut down a Chinese student's account in less than 24 hours. This as he posted a video on the platform mocking the regime and its leader. Chinese consulates in the U.S. using a new strategy as tensions continue to rise between Washington and Beijing. While the move seems generous, many say there are conditions attached. And the Chinese regime stepping up its surveillance. Now it can track its citizens on public transit in real time. That's on top of tracking them at schools and in shopping malls. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A huge wholesale food market in Beijing is closed, with a second day of record high CCP virus cases and no clear source of the cluster.
Security is tight around a massive Beijing food market that's been linked to a recent surge in COVID-19 cases. The city reported 36 new infections on Monday, a second consecutive day of record numbers, creating the biggest concentration of infections in the city since February. The cases have been linked to the Xinfeidi wholesale food market. It's closed to the public and tens of thousands of people living nearby are being tested. Xinfeidi is vast. It claims to be the largest agricultural wholesale market in Asia. It supplies 80% of Beijing's vegetables and meat, over an area roughly the size of 160 football pitches. Some provincial governments are warning residents not to travel to the capital. Liaoning and Hebei province have reported a handful of cases connected to Beijing. Accountant Ms. Han says the situation is of concern.
I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried. I came to Beijing on the 13th. If this was one day later, then I definitely wouldn't be able to come and find an internship.
The origin of this outbreak has not yet been identified.
China's capital city, Beijing, is bracing for a potential second wave of virus outbreak. After Beijing, a neighboring city also announced wartime emergency status. The new cluster of cases has spread to 3 provinces.
Waiting in long lines, residents in Beijing prepare to get tested for the CCP virus, commonly known as the coronavirus. The Chinese capital city is under wartime emergency mode after a new cluster of cases emerged at the city's largest wholesale food market. 79 new cases over the past 4 days. Most have contact history with the market, some visiting there around 2 weeks ago. Officials say over 200,000 people have been to the market since. 10 more neighborhoods nearby locked down, bringing the total number to 21. The now closed market is only 10 miles away from China's central government complex, Zhongnanhai. Beijing is conducting testing in the neighborhoods. Officials knock on every house's door to check if anyone visited the market. Those that have get tested. A Chinese medical expert who has become well known during the pandemic made comments on social media. Zhang Wenhong said that all cases linked to the market so they can be traced. But the huge amount of traffic passing through means it's not easy to predict where new clusters will emerge. Supplying nearly 80% of Beijing's vegetables, the market is also well connected with other cities and provinces. Officials say cases related to the market have spread to 3 other provinces, including Hebei, Liaoning, and Sichuan. Another neighboring city of Beijing also announced wartime status. At least 10 Chinese cities and provinces have issued warnings to residents not to go to the capital and asking all who went there recently to report to authorities. 2 district officials and the general manager of the Xinfeidi market were fired on Sunday for failing to control the outbreak. Chinese health officials say they don't know the origin of the outbreak, saying it's definitely not from Beijing, but is imported. State media quoting a Chinese CDC expert says that the virus could come from European countries, or from American countries, or could be from Russia. Beijing has previously claimed the virus originated from the US, then said it could be from Italy or France. The virus first broke out in Wuhan, China. Chinese Vice Premier Sun Chunlan said it's highly likely that the outbreak will widen.
According to Chinese authorities, the CCP virus has been found on cutting boards used to slice imported salmon. Major supermarkets in Beijing have started removing salmon from store shelves. Some markets in other cities are also doing the same. Other kinds of fish and even some vegetables have been impacted and are being thrown out. Two leading salmon suppliers in Denmark and Norway told Reuters that they can't send any salmon to China because the market is closed. They also noted that none of their employees have tested positive for the virus. It is commonly believed to be rare for fish to become infected with the CCP virus. That's because the CCP virus is a kind of pneumonia, an illness that targets the lungs, but fish do not have lungs. According to Chinese state-run media, genetic traces of the virus from the Beijing market outbreak suggest it could have come from Europe. Keith Neal, a retired professor of epidemiology at Britain's University of Nottingham, says any link to salmon was likely the result of cross-contamination. He explained that China gave the world this virus and it was always very likely to give it back to them. Finding a strain prevalent in Europe probably reflects people returning to China after traveling to Europe. Some Chinese netizens appear to be doubting the Chinese Communist regime's imported salmon narrative. One user wrote that Chinese authorities are misleading people to believe the virus is from abroad, like Norway, Canada, the US, Australia, and others. China's 50-cent army may now be turning into a 20-cent army. That's after it became a partially 70-center army in recent months. The colloquial name describes how the Chinese Communist regime pays internet users to post or circulate propaganda online and on social media. But China's economy is suffering. Its 50-cent army may soon turn into 40-cent army or even 20-cent army. According to one job advertisement, those hired will be paid 40, 30, or even 20 cents per comment. China's central bank has given American Express the green light to start processing transactions in China's currency, the yuan. The action gives the U.S. card company access to the country's market. Amex is the first foreign payment network to be licensed for transactions in mainland China. The country has long restricted foreign companies' access to its financial sector. But now they have to open up their economy to American financial service providers, thanks to the Phase 1 trade deal made with the U.S. earlier this year. Tensions between the U.S. and China are on the rise, but China is now taking a different approach. Chinese consulates in the U.S. are pushing humanitarian aid and investment. One NBC News investigation found all 5 Chinese consulates in the U.S., including the embassy in Washington, are part of it. The consulates have been donating food and other needed items to healthcare workers in areas hit hard by the virus. While the donations are needed, they come with conditions. These displays of generosity come with Chinese media coverage, showcased by the consulates and the Chinese regime on social media. The events are translated into multiple languages and pushed across several media platforms. It's reminiscent of the Belt and Road Initiative, when the regime invested billions into developing countries, which then became indebted to Beijing. The financial dependence allows Beijing to wield political power over them. Earlier this year, Beijing donated medical supplies to several countries, but most of it failed to meet quality standards and was unusable. A Wall Street Journal analysis has found that more than 1,300 Chinese medical suppliers who are registered to sell protective gear in the U.S. used fake addresses located in America. The analysis found that in one example, a Delaware entity listed a false address and an out-of-service phone number. All foreign manufacturers that make medical gear are required to have a representative in the U.S. to serve as a point of contact between overseas firms and the FDA. According to a database of corporate records, at least 1,300 Chinese firms listed CCTC Service Inc. as their U.S. agent, but no company with that name exists in the U.S. In May, the FDA pulled permission for over 60 Chinese firms to export N95-style masks to the U.S. That's after the agency found a large number of the products didn't meet quality standards. Federal prosecutors have also filed a recent criminal complaint against a Chinese manufacturer. The firm was among those that listed CCTC as a U.S. agent. The FDA investigator said since the agent didn't respond to emails, there is probable cause to believe CCTC is a fictitious corporation. The Chinese company has declined to comment and has not responded to the legal complaint. Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee are calling for a review into the controversial EB-5 visa program. The program gives green cards to foreign investors that create jobs in the U.S. According to some members of the committee, it has become clear that the Chinese Communist Party may be abusing the program to get the members into the U.S. They now say it's time to examine the program, just as Congress is currently reevaluating the U.S. and China relationship. Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with foreign ministers of the 27 European Union countries over their handling of Israel, China, and international organizations. The EU foreign ministers say that fundamentally the two sides share the same assessment of China, but that their approach is different. They added that they should be able to find common ground to cooperate. The EU is currently working to reach a unified position on China. The U.S. is in talks with Brazil over funding acquiring 5G gear produced by telecoms companies Ericsson and Nokia. This comes amid fears that Chinese tech giant Huawei could pose a risk to national security, a claim the firm strongly denies. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro says his government will take security and foreign policy into account when considering its 5G strategy. Talks around 5G have surpassed telecommunications and have entered the geopolitical realm. As tensions rise between Washington and Beijing, other countries are being pulled into the fray. While China has had its presence in Brazil for the last 20 years, the U.S. is urging governments around the world, including Brazil, should avoid Huawei, citing security concerns. Until recently, Romanian nuclear power company Nuclear Electrica was negotiating the construction of 2 nuclear reactors with China's National Nuclear Corporation. But now the Romanian government has requested that negotiations end. The country says it will find new partners for the project instead of working with the Chinese company. Romanian Prime Minister Ludovic Orban says it's clear to him that the project will not work well if done with China. Romania would have served as a springboard for Beijing to enter the EU's nuclear energy market and an open door for China to promote its Belt and Road Initiative in Eastern Europe. Romania's energy minister suggested the country cooperate with NATO partners on a new project instead. A Chinese student studying in the U.S. had his account on the video platform TikTok closed down permanently. He had posted a video mocking the communist regime. He tells us about his reaction. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
When a Chinese student in the U.S. posted a video mocking the Chinese communist regime on TikTok, he didn't expect what happened next.
The next morning, in less than 24 hours, TikTok deleted my account permanently.
TikTok is a video app popular with American teenagers. Its popularity surged during the virus pandemic. In the first quarter of this year, the app recorded over 2 billion downloads. The country with the third highest downloads was the US. This hugely popular app is owned by a company in Beijing. Joe is very angry that his account was shut down because he uses the overseas version of the app.
Since it operates in the United States, it should follow US law.
TikTok's Chinese counterpart censors criticism of the communist regime, but it said it would treat its overseas users differently.
It is an outrage that the company goes against regulations and suppresses our freedom of speech.
He thinks the account shutdown has to do with the company's ties to Beijing. Joe made the video after Hong Kong passed a controversial bill. It means anyone who disrespects China's national anthem could face up to 3 years in prison. Hong Kong pro-democracy activists see the bill as infringement on their freedom of expression. Joe also expressed his anger over the bill.
The Chinese Communist Party has no right to dominate and control Hong Kong like this, and I'm very angry about it.
Joe says Beijing's influence is not limited to Hong Kong. The regime has been sending student spies to steal intellectual property in Western countries. Beijing also uses its economic ties to take revenge and control freedom of speech in the free world. For example, after Australia demanded an investigation into the origin of the CCP virus, China imposed an 80% tariff on Australian barley imports.
All those things that the Chinese Communist Party has done are threatening the safety of the world and humanity. So I think someone must speak up and resist their vicious deeds. That's how I got my courage to speak out.
Joe is the only one in his family that is anti-communism.
Not only my parents, my entire family are devoted Communist Party supporters.
But he is different due to his past experiences. Zhou said at 18, his mother tried sending him to a Beijing college, saying he could earn a lot of money if he got in.
I passed all their tests. In the end, they asked me to pledge loyalty to the Communist Party and the state. Immediately, I realized something was wrong. This is really weird, and I instantly rejected the college's offer. After I went home, my mom finally admitted that it was a college for training spies for the Communist Party.
He also doesn't like the education indoctrination. Zhou said his school in the mainland forbade students to pursue their own personality and free will.
What I'm thinking about in my head is my own individual freedom. It's my human right. What does it have to do with anybody else?
After college, he was able to use software to cross over China's massive internet censorship system. He learned more about the vicious deeds of the communist regime. Longing for democracy and freedom, Zhou went to the US to study in 2011. He is now in his second master's degree. He says he doesn't plan on going back to China because he could face prison for mocking the party. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
A violent knife attack in Hong Kong injured a bystander who tried to intervene. The bystander, a pro-democracy protester, says he does not regret it.
A man injured when defending a reporter for a sister media, The Epoch Times, says he has no regrets about stepping in. The man was hospitalized with 2 severed nerves in his hand when he stepped in to try to stop the knife attack. His actions protected part-time videographer Jerry from the attacker. A man in a white shirt is wielding a knife, turning it to Jerry. The camera drops to the ground. The young man, a bystander, grabs the knife with his bare hands and stops the attack. Despite the serious injury, the man urged fellow Hong Kongers to be ready to defend their freedoms and values. His friend that accompanied him to the hospital told us his words. He warned against indifference to the ongoing fight for democracy in Hong Kong. He said if people don't bother to come out en masse to show their support and just rely on others, the effect can be contagious. Whereas huge shows of support, like the 2 million-strong pro-democracy protest last June, would prevent attacks like this one. The attacker is now held in police custody. He's a member of a pro-communist political party. He was charged with wounding and striking to cause bodily harm, as well as possessing poison.
It's been 1 year since protests began in Hong Kong. Back then, Hong Kongers were worried about an extradition law that would have allowed Beijing to extradite anyone in the region to stand trial in the mainland. Now, a new law, a so-called national security law, has many people worried. Wealthy Hong Kongers feeling uneasy about the communist regime's threat to their freedoms are making emergency plans to migrate overseas.
Hong Kong residents are looking for an escape route overseas. They're facing a so-called national security law which could erode the nation's rule of law and surrender its freedoms to the Chinese mainland. One local businessman is selling all his Hong Kong properties and has already transferred $10 million to Singapore. He'll live there from now on. Another investment banker will relocate his family to Australia so that his kids can have a better environment growing up. And they're not alone.
Now 7 million people, basically everyone, can immigrate, but this is not what Hong Kong people want, right? Maybe those rich people will go when they are scared, but everyone likes living in Hong Kong. Those who leave are forced to go.
They may not want to go, but they're preparing for the worst anyway. An immigration firm says it's received 5 times as many inquiries as usual since the national security law was introduced.
Google search. Interestingly, of course, what tops the Google search, of course, is the national security law. But what was equally popular was the word immigration. So you can imagine people in Hong Kong are generally quite worried.
The US and British governments have stepped in to help Hong Kong. They're preparing asylum plans for Hong Kongers who want to leave. The unrest began 1 year ago when the government tried to introduce an extradition law. The law would have allowed the Chinese communist regime to bring anyone in Hong Kong to the mainland to stand trial. The law was eventually scrapped, but protesters continued fighting for democracy and an investigation into alleged police brutality. Many believe the Chinese Communist Party is now trying to crush the protests through its national security law.
Year-long pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong have evoked widespread sympathy in democratic Taiwan. Thousands of Taiwanese people who support the city's pro-democracy movement gathered in Taipei to mark 1 year since the protests began.
More than 10 non-profit groups and thousands of people gathered in Taipei to show their support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters. They also gathered to appeal to Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen to accelerate the asylum process for Hong Kongers. But Taiwan has little experience handling refugees and is scrambling to prepare. It's also working on a plan to keep out Chinese spies who might try to join the influx.
I hope that the government will clarify this matter or consider how they can limit the spy influence and at the same time continue to protect these fellow Hong Kong protesters with government policies.
Some supporters say many Taiwanese people are extremely willing to extend help to Hong Kongers.
I hope that we can provide our Hong Kong friends with some special pathways. For example, some special avenues for them to find work or other special support for their lives. Like when they get here, they can rent a place.
President Tsai Ing-wen recently became the first global leader to pledge to help Hong Kongers who escape their city due to what they see as tightening Chinese control. That includes the newly introduced so-called national security law, which pro-democracy protesters say smothers their freedom and autonomy.
An explosion rocked a highway in southeastern China over the weekend when a tanker truck driving along it blew up. The accident reportedly killed 19 people and injured close to 200, including nearly 25 that were seriously injured.
A tanker carrying liquefied petroleum gas exploded on a highway exit in Zhejiang province. A second explosion followed when the truck's gaseous cargo reached a nearby factory. The blast sent flames and a cloud of smoke high into the air. Locals say it destroyed much of a nearby village, causing residential buildings and factories to collapse. Nearly 200 people are receiving emergency care in nearby hospitals. Video filmed by a local resident shows scorched trees and grass where the blast ignited. Furniture and appliances inside his nearby house were also broken. Another person captured clips of small fires burning through collapsed buildings and factories. One bystander said around 10 to 20 cars were incinerated to an extent that left almost nothing behind. Almost all windows in the village were also broken. The cause of the accident is now under investigation.
The Chinese regime already monitors citizens wherever they are with facial recognition. But now China is stepping up its already massive surveillance amid the pandemic in the name of locating virus carriers. Chinese citizens are waking up to the network's pervasive penetration into their everyday lives.
A Chinese netizen recently shared on social media how local authorities located him on a moving bus by using surveillance cameras with facial recognition technology. He wrote, "I was sitting on a bus when I failed to take a call from the CDC. They then found the person sitting next to me through surveillance cameras on the bus and gave him a call to make him notify me. The thing is, the fellow passenger boarded the bus midway without buying a ticket at the station. He didn't even leave any of his personal information for him to be reached." Chinese state media once reported that facial recognition systems were installed on buses. It's part of what's called the security and control system in smart cities. These surveillance cameras capture the images and videos of passengers in real time. They're uploaded to a platform connected to various police agencies. The faces are then compared with ones already in the database to filter for, quote, key personnel. China has more facial recognition cameras than any other country, and they're often hard to avoid. Cities in China are also under the heaviest CCTV surveillance in the world, according to the report. The pervasive surveillance cameras on China's public transit are part of China's mass surveillance network known as the Skynet project. It connects surveillance cameras on streets, at schools and shopping malls, and on trains and buses across the country. With its extensive facial recognition database, authorities are able to track and access a citizen's travel history and quickly identify a large number of people in transit. Since last December, China mandated that all telecom operators collect face scans of people applying for a new phone number. The regime claimed that its mass surveillance is for boosting security, but critics say it's so Beijing can tighten its control over ordinary civilians in their everyday lives.
The so-called big data is used by the CCP to build its digital authoritarianism, and its ultimate purpose is surveillance. In China, surveillance cameras have become ubiquitous, and internet monitoring is everywhere. Every single move of the Chinese people is under the watch of the CCP.
and China is exporting its advanced facial recognition technology and data analytics tools to at least 38 countries, including governments with poor human rights records, according to a 2018 Freedom House report. The regime is pushing for telecommunications dominance. The report says Beijing is doing this to benefit its own tech-infused policing capacity and help other repressive authorities overseas.
The use of artificial intelligence to track their movements, not just those that are in the concentration camps, but to track the entire Uyghur population using cameras and facial recognition software, which has been developed in China and is now being exported to other countries where you have repressive governments.
According to an analysis compiled by the UK-based tech research firm Comparatech, China is expected to have up to 626 million CCTV cameras in use by 2020. Based on the country's population of 1.4 billion people, that would mean nearly one camera for every 2 people.
The Federal Reserve will start buying corporate bonds on Tuesday, making it easier for companies to borrow money. Here's more in today's Business Briefs.
The Federal Reserve said today that it will begin purchasing corporate bonds Tuesday. It will ensure companies can borrow through the bond market during the pandemic. The buy will be from highly rated investment-grade companies. Stock markets rose on Monday after the news boosted investor confidence. Long lines of shoppers snaked around stores in England on Monday as shops reopened their doors after 83 days of lockdown. Stores look very different though, as shoppers must line up outside to limit numbers inside for social distancing. It's estimated the lockdown has cost the UK's non-food stores $2.3 billion per week in lost revenues. Electric car maker Tesla is reportedly negotiating possible incentives with a Texas county. It could bring a new auto assembly plant to the area near Austin. A county court will discuss terms of the deal on Tuesday. It's unclear whether Tesla has picked the Austin region as the site for the plant. In the past, Elon Musk also mentioned Oklahoma as a possible site. The number of public charging points for electric vehicles jumped 60% in 2019, the biggest increase in 3 years. According to the International Energy Agency, the increase reflects efforts to boost infrastructure for an expected boom in electric car sales. According to the IEA, electric cars only accounted for 1% of global car stock last year.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.